Hello and welcome to Cannaman TV. My name is Connor McLeod, and in this interview I get the chance to chat with Professor Mike Barnes. Professor Barnes is regarded by many as being the UK's foremost leading cannabis expert physician. Professor of Neurological Rehabilitation at Newcastle University, Professor Barnes has been an instrumental factor in the formation of not only the Medical Cannabis Clinics, but the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, as well as being highly active with the End Our Pain campaign group, United Patients Alliance, and Clear UK Cannabis Law Reform. Professor Barnes is also the author of the book The Beginner's Guide to Medical Cannabis, which gives an introductory approach to an ever-evolving subject. Now make sure and like and subscribe, and stick around until the end so you see the end of episode cartoon. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Thanks very much for chatting with me, Mike.
Yeah, not at all. It's good.
We'll just get started with essentially the endocannabinoid system. Because of your, obviously your career background, could you give a detailed description of what the endocannabinoid system is, why it affects such a wide range of medical conditions, and how cannabinoid supplementation can help?
Well, all animals, except all animals with vertebrae, have an endocannabinoid system. And that means that they have receptors in the brain and throughout the body called cannabis or cannabinoid receptors. There's at least two and probably more, called CB1 and CB2. The body produces natural chemicals that bind to those receptors. Those chemicals are called, for what it's worth, anandamide and 2-AG, and again, probably more. So more importantly, what does that do when those chemicals bind to those receptors? What the endocannabinoid system does is actually have a sort of master controller of all the other transmitter systems in the body. I'm sure people have heard of the fact that the body works through transmitter systems, like dopamine. That's the one that's deficient if you get Parkinson's disease. There's the serotonin system, there's the opioid system, there's the gabapentin system. There's lots of bodily systems. The whole body works through these neurotransmitters. And the endocannabinoid system is the master controller of all those other transmitters. And that explains why cannabis has such a broad-ranging number of things it helps. Because all that's happening is the cannabinoids in the plant, called phytocannabinoids, are just coming into the body and locking onto those receptors and supplementing, replacing, modulating our own natural body's endocannabinoid system. And cannabis has such a wide-ranging number of treatments and a number of possibilities because it interacts with that system that in turn controls everything we do, which explains why cannabis can have an effect on anxiety at one end, pain at the other, epilepsy, things like Crohn's disease, muscle spasm and multiple sclerosis. Some people will say cannabis must be some sort of snake oil because it has all these effects. No one drug can have all these effects. But once you know how it works, then that explains why it has such a broad range of effects, because it works through our own body's endocannabinoid system.
You mentioned the phytochemicals found in cannabis. One of the things when it comes to research in particular, there seems to be a bit of a breakdown in identifying cannabis as a plant. On one side, they seem to have a phenotype. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but on one side they've got a phenotype, so they're based on the physiological effects of cannabis. And then on the other side, we have a chemotype based on the molecular constituents of what cannabis is. Is this one of the reasons why you have clinical trials which seem to not to highlight the efficiency of cannabinoid medicine based on their approach to single molecule analysis?
Yeah, well, I think the problem that some people have with trying to get cannabis as a medicine is that they think it in a narrow pharmaceutical type model box. And when the drug company develops a medicine, it's usually just one molecule, and you can take that one molecule and compare it against a placebo, and does it do the job? And is it safe? That's fine. That works very well. They're so-called double-blind placebo-controlled studies. You can't do that with the plant because it's such a huge variety of different cannabinoids. There's about 144 of them. There's about 100 terpenes, which give cannabis its smell, and they have medical properties. And there's a similar number of flavonoids, which give cannabis its color, and they have medical properties. So it's not just one chemical produced by a pharmaceutical company. It's a whole family of medicines. And you can isolate one of those compounds, like CBD, for example, and do studies on it. And that's what people like GW Pharma have done very well. But first of all, that would take tens of years to work through every possible combination, probably hundreds of years, to be honest, if you think of all the combinations. And there's good evidence, I think, that the whole plant cannabis works much better than just the individual components. That's a so-called entourage effect. And I think we know that. If you take CBD, like Epidiolex, which is pretty well, but not quite, pretty well pure CBD, and that works, nothing wrong with it. But if you take the whole plant with all the other cannabinoids and some of the terpenes, I think that works a lot better. So I think the problem some people have got is pushing cannabis down a pharmaceutical route in which it doesn't fit. We need a bit of a change of mindset to assess cannabis as a botanical medicine, a botanical plant, and not be obsessed by the possible pharmaceutical route that people are pushing it down.
I mean, do you think there needs to be an innovative approach? I mean, what would you propose as a means of highlighting the efficiency of what cannabis is?
Well, I think there needs to be a whole different approach to looking at the evidence of the usefulness of cannabis. I think there needs to be a whole different approach about getting into the country, about assessing the quality of the product, monitoring it, regulating it. I don't like regulation, but you've got to regulate something if it's used as a medicine. And many countries have got around this by just developing a different government entity, like Holland, for example, has done an Office of Medicinal Cannabis, and they're looking at everything cannabis. They assess the evidence, they look at the regulation, they sell it, the government controls it all. Now there's lots and lots of different models of that, but at least that gets around the problem of pushing it down the pharmaceutical route in which it doesn't fit. So I would favour looking at it from a different angle and treating it as a plant should be treated as a botanical medicine.
Is that why is it the NICE requirements? They seem to give an extremely limited amount of applications for cannabinoid medicine. One of the things that I mean, last year I think you criticised them in August last year, and then they brought out another regulation, another guidelines, and they didn't seem to do very much improvement on what they'd proposed previously.
No, and I think that's the reason. The people on that panel, I don't think they understood the cannabis as a plant. There were no cannabis experts on it. That was one criticism I made. And the other one is just what I've said. They were trying to push cannabis down the pharmaceutical route. And if you look at the double-blind, placebo-controlled studies on cannabis, if that's your mindset, if that's all that counts, then I have to agree with them. There's very few double-blind, placebo-controlled studies from the efficacy of cannabis because they're difficult to do and it's not appropriate to do them. But if that's your mindset, you think, oh, let's look at that. Oh, there's not enough evidence for pain. I mean, for example, the Royal College of Physicians, when the law changed in November 18, came out with a report saying there's not enough evidence for use in pain and we don't recommend its use in pain, which is complete nonsense. The evidence that cannabis is a painkiller is overwhelming, and 50 countries have now legalized cannabis and 48 of them have approved it for use with pain. But the Royal College of Physicians, in its wisdom, just looks at double-blind, placebo-controlled studies and says, oh, there's not enough of them, we don't use it as pain. So they've got a very, very narrow, unfortunately restrictive mindset.
At this moment in time, what direction is it taken? Is it still just this back and forward through different enterprises that are trying to identify and move forward with cannabis, or is there a linear approach is there a consensus between different groups?
Well, I think fortunately, I mean, I actually don't criticise the law that changed in this country. A lot of people criticise the government. I think that's unfair because when the law changed in November 18, it was quite a liberal law change. I mean, a doctor on the specialist register, that's a hospital consultant, not GP, sadly, I think that was a mistake, but they can prescribe cannabis for any condition, if they think it's the right thing for that patient, taking into account the evidence, taking into account the guidelines, they can do that. But it hasn't happened because the doctor's mindset is equally stuck in the pharmaceutical model, and also they're not trained. So sadly, at the moment, the only way to get it legally, ignoring the CBD over-the-counter market for a moment, is through the private system, which I think is remarkably sad. My view of the evidence of cannabis is there's enough evidence to prescribe it for many conditions, but let's learn as we go along. Let's not let people suffer with chronic pain or chronic epilepsy or Crohn's disease or whatever it is, where pharmaceutical medicine is doing them no favors. It's not working for them, or they've got lots of side effects. Let's try it for those people because it's very safe, and let's learn as we go along. We need more evidence. We need more time. We need more. We need more evidence to say this is good for this condition, but that sort of the thing is good for that condition. We need more of that evidence, but my view is we should try it and see and record what we're doing and learn as we go along.
I'm assuming that's why when the CBD, I think it was the Food Standards Agency, put out their new regulation. I think obviously you heavily criticised that. Is that because there's so many people that were experiencing first-hand relief from over-the-counter CBD?
Yeah, the CBD over-the-counter market is a bit of a mess. It does need some regulation. That's twice I've suggested something should be regulated. That's very unusual for me.
Very conservative.
But in fairness, there are some studies, as I'm sure you know, that have looked at what's on the CBD, what's in the bottle, compared to what it says on the label, and sometimes it doesn't bear much comparison. So there's a lot of people out there selling rubbish, to put it bluntly. So it certainly needed some regulation. The Food Standards Agency, I think, has gone way too far and suggested that it has to be pushed down as novel food route. I don't think it's a novel food. That will be very expensive. It's said to cost about £250,000 to get that license, novel food license. That will put all the very good boutique, if you like, CBD suppliers out of business, almost certainly. And they've also come up with some totally ridiculous thing that the most you should use is 70 milligrams. There's absolutely no scientific evidence for that whatsoever, none, not even a jot. They've made that figure up. I don't know why they made it up, but the average dosage you need for, say, take an adult with pain is about 60 to 100 milligrams, sometimes a bit more, sometimes a bit less. So they picked 70 out of the thin air, and that will actually stop CBD helping a lot of people if they stick to that 70 milligram limit. And the other daft thing is that CBD is a medicine. There's absolutely no doubt. It helps pain, it helps anxiety, it helps the children with epilepsy, and a lot of other things. But you can't sell it as a medicine. You can make no medical claim. Now, I understand you need to regulate medicines, but if there's a medicine there that is working and is very safe, like CBD is, then there must be some way that those making it can say, well, this might help your pain. Okay, you can put a thing on the label saying, talk to your doctor about it if you want, but to make no claims, we've got the ironic situation that people read about it in magazines or newspapers, they want to try it, yet they can't, they don't know what to do. They buy it off the shelf at the health food shop or online, and they say, now what do I do? How much do I take? And the people making it can't tell them, which is crazy. So it needed something doing, but the way the Food Standards Agency has gone about it is just all wrong and very unhelpful and just favours the big players in the market. It's a commercial thing and not a safety thing.
It is extremely frustrating because, like you said, you've got a lot of small town businesses and people generally who are experiencing a lot of help, a lot of therapeutic benefit, and are no longer able to get it. And one of the frustrating aspects for that is that's obviously a lot of anecdotal evidence, really, that cannabis is helpful. And like you mentioned before, we did a lot more research. So how important do you think that things, longitudinal studies such as the Project 21, how important do you think these are, and how many more do you think are going to be required? Do you think that one will be enough? Do you think we'll have the ongoing?
I think with cannabis, it's such a rich variety of things, I think we'll never finish learning about it. At the moment, there's evidence come out that CBG is useful for various conditions, CBC, CBN. And if you put into the mix all the terpenes and other combinations, we'll be going for forever, learning more about cannabis plant and its value and its medicine, what right combination. There's not one right combination, is the other thing to say. It's a very personalized medicine. If you take something like pain, some respond to a high CBD product, some to a balanced product, some to a high THC product. Sometimes you need other terpenes added into it. No, there's not one product that's right for everyone with pain. So we'll never stop learning. So the Project 21, great idea. I think anyone prescribing it, that we should encourage the patients who get it prescribed to record what we've given them, how it's helped them, how much it's helped them, and just, as I said earlier, learn as we go along. There's so much we need to learn. But Project 21 is a great start, but we'll never stop learning about it.
The UK certainly made some leaps and bounds in the past few years regarding cannabinoids and cannabinoid medicine. One of the things, obviously, as yourself, you've obviously been a key factor in it is the Cannabis Medical Clinics and the Cannabis Clinicians Society, which are things, obviously, in the past few years were not present and just popped up in the past few years. What can you say about the Cannabis Medical Clinics and what is their ethos and their aim for the future? Well,
in many ways, it's strange for me to say it, but I think it's sad that they exist. What I'd love to see and what I will try and do is to make cannabis available on the National Health Service, everyone who needs it. that's the goal. At the moment, because the NHS is just not prescribing, there are 2 prescriptions in the National Health Service, as best of our knowledge, 2. The only way to get cannabis as a medicine legally is to get it in the private sector. And that's expensive. It's not so much the consultation, it's the medicine itself. So the doctor writes the prescription in the clinic, then it's not the clinic doesn't charge for the medicine, it's the importer has to pay to get it in from Canada or wherever it's coming from. They have to pay for the import license. Until very recently, it had to be 1 prescription at a time, which added to the cost. So you're looking at an average cost for an adult with pain, for example, something like £600-800 a month. And most people can't afford that, let alone the children who need much higher doses, probably look about £2,000 a month. And there's virtually no one in this country who can sensibly afford £2,000 a month. But it's the only way they can get it. So I felt, and it's been criticised, that if people want it, and this is the only way to get it, then let's set up a system where they can get it. And to say, no, you can't have it because it's a private sector, I don't agree with it, I think is a bit welfist, if that's the word. I don't like it. I think it's wrong that people are having to get it through the private sector, but if they want it through the private sector, it's the only way they can get it. And that's why we set up the medical cannabis clinics, to provide for that supply.
The Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, is that a complementary group that's there to inform and educate? Because I think one of the, as you mentioned, there's been almost none prescriptions given through medical cannabis and stuff like that. And is that largely just based on ignorance through GPs and obviously that level of
I mean, the doctors have really generally never been taught about an endocannabinoid system, never been taught about cannabis. And that's a good reason why some doctors won't prescribe. I mean, who wants their GP or their hospital consultant to prescribe something they don't understand anything about? So we desperately need education, which is why we set up the Academy, which is a free online teaching program. There are doctors interested, and so we set up the Medical Cannabis Clinicians Society, which is a not-for-profit community interest company, I think it's called, effectively a charity. And the aim was to get those doctors, well, not just doctors, clinicians. So it's some pharmacists, nurses, it's open to any clinician, broadly interpreted, who wants to learn. And so we're setting up road shows around the country when COVID lets us get back to that. We do an annual conference. We're doing mentoring. So the few doctors who are prescribing, they can go back online to the private site and say, well, I've got this patient with this. I suggested that. Is that right? Or I don't know what to do in this case. So there's a sort of mutual support. We've now got about 55 members, most of which are doctors, in fact. I've trained about 50 doctors, and we think there's now about 27 doctors actually prescribing in the country, which is a lot more than was even 3 months ago. So that's tiny numbers, but it's increasing. So the Cannabis Society, with its supporting mechanisms and its teaching and its training, and hopefully it's evidence-based before long as well, where you can type in, Crohn's disease and show the evidence for cannabis in Crohn's disease, for example. That will happen over the course of this year. So that's what it's there for. It's to support the few doctors who've stuck their head above the parapet and said, I'm going to try and prescribe this and I want to learn about it.
So since in 2016, you were asked by the cross-party parliamentary group to provide evidence, a report based on the evidence that was available, which I think was cannabis, the evidence for medicinal use. What has changed, or what's been the most noticeable advancement since you produced that report in 2016?
Well, interestingly, I did that report with my daughter, who's a clinical psychologist, and we looked at about 20,000 references were then available for cannabis as a medicine, if you like. I'd like to say I read all of them in every detail. We did actually look at most of them. But since then, what's changed? There's a lot changed because now many countries are opening up to cannabis as medicine. There's more studies. And the number of studies produced since 2016 has doubled what there was in all the years before 2016. So there now is about 40,000 references. So there's a lot more knowledge out there. The main thing from 2016 is the evidence for epilepsy. That has gone up exponentially, the knowledge about epilepsy. I was a bit cautious about epilepsy because in 2016 there wasn't that many studies. Now I will be much less cautious in the sense that it is anticonvulsant. We know that's one thing that's changed. And all the other things we did recommend, like pain and anxiety, the evidence has just been shored up. We know more about it. And we know a lot more about other cannabinoids now, not enough, like CBG, as I said earlier, which we barely mentioned in the report because there was virtually nothing written about them. So our knowledge is going up like that. And I think if we did the report today, it would take twice as long. It'd be twice as difficult. But the report will be much better because there's so much more evidence that we could now say that we couldn't say in 16.
Personally, what do you think is the most exciting aspect of cannabinoid as a medicine?
I think it's a revolutionary medicine because it has the potential to have such a wide-ranging effect on so many different conditions that are otherwise very difficult to treat. I mean, chronic pain is the leading thing. Chronic pain is very difficult to treat with pharmaceutical medicine. The things doctors tend to use, like opioids, are full of problems and overdose risks, and people die from overdoses of opioids every year. So cannabis is very useful for those chronic long-term symptoms that are so difficult to treat: anxiety, pain, chronic epilepsy that's resistant to drug treatment, a lot of other things I could go on about. So that's why it's so important. But any medicine you've got to look at, you've got to think, well, that works and that's great, but is it safe? And my real enthusiasm for cannabis is that it is remarkably safe. You can't die of a cannabis overdosage. If you get the dose wrong, you don't want to get the dose wrong, of course not. If you do, the patient isn't going to hugely suffer. Like if you get the dose wrong with opioids, you could kill somebody. If you get other antidepressant drugs, there's a lot of side effects for those. Anticonvulsant drugs, a lot of side effects. Now, cannabis isn't a cure-all, it's not a wonder drug, it does have side effects, but it is very safe. And that's a good thing for a doctor to be reassured. This might work or might not work, but it's safe, and therefore I really should try it for these things when all my other options are closed to me. It's a very exciting time. And I think in the next 10 years, the fuss that some people are making about cannabis will go away. I think we'll think, what the hell was the fuss about back then? It's now a standard part of our armory of medicines. It's safe, it's not a wonder drug, but we're going to use it. And I think in 10 years' time, it will be just an accepted other medical alternative.
In 10 years' time, do you think it's unreasonable to think that cannabis will be the underpinning of most medicines, or a large amount of medicines in comparison to now?
I don't think we've seen the end of the pharmaceutical industry. The pharmaceutical industry will make sure of that. And there's nothing wrong with pharmaceutical drugs, and we all use them all the time, from aspirin to steroids, whatever. But I think what we will see is cannabis alongside, as a botanical medicine, alongside the pharmaceutical medicines. And I think we're seeing a change of attitude of the patients and the people in the country, more to more natural products, wellness products, botanical products, going back to what medicine was about until the pharmaceutical industry arrived about 50, 60, 70 years ago. So I don't think it's not going to replace pharmaceutical medicine, but I think it will be a very useful partner to pharmaceutical medicine, and an accepted partner by at least most doctors, if not all.
What do you think the rest of the year holds for medicinal cannabis? Do you think there'll be any leaps or bounds regarding it? Do you think the coronavirus has helped in any way, shape or form?
No, I mean, there's a lot of noise on the internet, isn't there, about you shouldn't take cannabis because it's going to make the coronavirus illness worse. And on the other side of the coin is you should take cannabis because it's going to make the coronavirus better. Yeah. There's no evidence, I don't think convincing evidence at the moment, that cannabis makes any difference to the coronavirus. So what's it done to the industry? Well, we're seeing patients in the clinic still because we're now using telemedicine, which is good. It saves people with chronic conditions coming a long way to a clinic. I think that's something good that's come out of COVID, actually. That stays. We're seeing a bit of a slowdown of investment in the industry, and we do need, I know some people would like to see grow your own. I don't differ with that, but it's not right for everybody. I think in addition, we need a UK industry, so we're not so reliant on imports. And I think COVID has slowed down the development of the UK industry, but hopefully it's only going to be for this 3 months, 4 months, and then investment will come back. The work will come back to developing UK industry. So COVID, of course, is a disaster economically for many things. I think probably, though, for the cannabis industry, it has just put a break on for 3 or 4 months, and we'll see it getting back on track come the summer.
Excellent. I think, Mike, that's actually, I've covered most of what I was going to cover. It's an extremely
Okay.
articulate response you've given here. Yeah, is there anything like you like to add? I mean, what do you feel? You're at the forefront of what's going on at the moment in the UK. I mean, is it still very much Wild West as it was last year? Are we making progress, or is it what's going on?
Yeah, the cannabis industry has been a bit Wild Westish. There's a bit of get rich quick merchants, which we don't want in the industry. It's a proper industry, a good quality industry. That's what we've got to make it, and we do need to keep out the sharks. And we're just going to make money out of it. We have to remember, sadly, that the cannabis industry has been a criminal industry and still is a big criminal industry, and therefore we're going to get some criminals or those on that side-ish of the law come into the legitimate industry. We've just got to make sure that it's an ethical industry, a good quality industry, and I think it will be. I think what I'd love to see this year is GPs able to prescribe, because I think they'll be better at that sort of medicine. They're looking after patients with, after all, they're the people who mainly look after people with chronic pain or chronic anxiety. When the specialist has made the diagnosis and wandered off, it's the GP that takes the bulk of the ongoing care. So I think it was a mistake for GPs to be excluded as the primary prescriber. So that's the one thing I would like to see during this year, is GPs being allowed to prescribe. Then, of course, that opens up the potential to what is a number of GPs, about 90,000, I think. And we only need a tiny number of those to be prescribing. We don't need every doctor in the country to be prescribing cannabis, but we need a core of perhaps just 200 or 300 doctors who will be able to prescribe. And I think opening up to GPs is going to be a real way to get it more widely available.
Do you think at the moment, obviously, it's just Sativex, Epidiolex, excluding dronabinol and nabilone? Do you think there's any is there any in the pipeline of any more innovative cannabis medicines that the GPs may be using or that are currently underway?
Well, I know GW Pharma are carrying on their work with other cannabinoids. I don't work for them, so not surprising. I don't know exactly what they're doing. I think we'll see more medicines from that source. I think I would love to see a better acceptance of CBD and the non-controlled cannabinoids being out there more readily and stuck under some obscure novel food regulation. I think that's important. And I know we will see the usefulness of the other cannabinoids coming to the fore. I think this year, maybe even next year, CBG is going to be the next CBD. And we're going to see other things come along. And I think we'll just slowly, year by year, unravel the properties of the cannabis plant. I think we'll be surprised how useful it's going to be for all sorts of medical issues over the coming years.
Is it unlikely that GPs will be given whole plant medicine, or is it just most likely it will be just individual medicine?
I hope they can. I mean, doctors can prescribe the whole plant, and I'm a great believer in the whole plant rather than the isolates. I think there's good evidence that the whole plant is better than the isolates. We need the isolates of a sort of academic level and scientific level. What does this isolated cannabinoid do? We need to know that knowledge. I have no problem with isolates in that sense. But I think for a medicine, the full plant is better. And we can prescribe those now. That's what I'd love to see, just more doctors prescribing the whole plant. As long as that medicine is good quality, high standard, GMP quality, so the people can be reassured that what's on the label is actually what's in the product, consistent batch to batch. And that's my problem with Grow Your Own, which I have greater sympathy with, but the batch to batch control isn't necessarily there. So I do think we need to see it as a controlled medicine, so that customers can be reassured that what the doctor's prescribing is what they're actually getting. So I forgot what you asked me now, but
you actually answered it, so good for you. No, that's brilliant, Mike. If I'm being honest, actually, because I was going to send you over, and I could do it after this as well, but I wrote a book last year called A Case for Cannabis, and I included you in it, and that's why I became aware. Yeah, that's why I became aware of this, the medical cannabis clinicians and stuff like that. And it was funny because It wasn't until, because I was like, oh, I have to send it over. But because it was last year, I looked over it and I was like, I have to make sure I didn't write anything derogatory. And it was extremely complimentary.
I was going to say, what did you say about me?
No, it's extremely complimentary. I just described at the end of the book that there's an extremely innovative approach to create these clinics where you have a space where people require medicine but can't get it, etc. And it is accurate. Do you think, I think there's one opening in Aberdeen in the next wee while?
Yeah, there's 4, best of my knowledge, there's 4 commercial clinics. There's the Medical Cannabis Clinics, which I'm associated with, although I don't really prescribe very much myself at all. Sapphire Clinics, My Access Clinics, and Cannabis Access Clinics. And that's where the doctor, I think there's 2 or 3 private doctors who are just doing their own thing in their own premises, or the Nuffield or wherever it is they practice. But they're mainly out of those 4. And one of those 4 is opening an Aberdeen branch. I forget which it is actually, but it's not the Medical Cannabis Clinics. We've got 6 or 7 opening, although we might actually not open them, in the sense that if telemedicine is here to stay and is suitable for most people, not absolutely suitable for everybody, then it would be nice to think we could see people in their own home. There's a lot we've learned from COVID about the accessibility of things like we're using Zoom here, for example. It's working remarkably well.
Yeah.
You know, would you want to travel to a clinic to talk to a doctor? Some that need examining, you know, and a proper sort of physical examination for some good reason, and they have to be seen face to face, sure. But most things like pain don't need to be seen face to face. You can confirm they've got a pain diagnosis from the GP records and everything else, and you can talk to them over all these technologies that are available to us now.
I think it'll be a technological step forward when we're able to fax over some prescriptions.
Yeah, yes. So yeah, there is Scotland has been a bit left behind, I'm afraid, in terms of access to clinics. So whoever it is that's starting one in Aberdeen, good luck to them, and I hope it opens soon.
Well, thanks a bunch for chatting to me, Mike.
Good, no problem.
Thanks for sticking around until the end of the video. Make sure and like and subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll see you next time.